This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
Well, that's a good question, Cody. What do we want to talk about? Well, I think with everything going on in the world right now, it would be ideal to try to take our minds off of it by talking about some pro wrestling. Because that's usually the solution, isn't it? Bad economy, global warfare, mass exodus of the population. But at least we still have the Peacock Network. So we can remove ourselves from the real world occasionally and try to find some joy in this life. And you know, there are some great books out there that I've read about how you can mindfully be in self-control and not get swept up into the drama of the news cycle. You know, manage the things that you have complete and full authority over, and for the things that are completely out of your control, let them be. You can't save everybody. You can't help everybody. But you can help yourself, first and foremost. And the older I get, the more I realize how important that is. Some call it selfishness. I call it being human. Because nobody's coming to save you. Understand that. But I also don't claim to be an intellectual. I'm just your run-of-the-mill average American chump, I guess. I'm doing my thing. I'm letting everybody else do theirs. They don't bother me. I don't bother them. We're even. And if they do try to intervene in my life, I tell them to go pound sand. But anyway, we're here to talk about wrestling, right? At least that's what I had planned. And I'm sure that's why the subscribers came back. Because, well, that is sort of the staple piece of the FSWR channel. So why don't we go ahead and get into that before this runs into a 40-minute tangent on politics. Welcome to the FSWR channel. Make sure to subscribe, comment, like the show. Check us out every Monday and Friday for new, fresh content. Today for the Friday edition, we've got the classic wrestling to talk about. Slowly and methodically making our ways through the libraries of Crockett, Midsouth, and World Class. It has been a roller coaster ride for a couple of those companies in the last year. The Midsouth reviews are the newer addition to the channel, so we are only in the beginning stages of that. But as I keep saying every week, boy, is it a positive detox from the AEW recaps. You know, as much fun as I had blistering that show from week to week, the brain and body can only handle so much. You know, at this point, I'm just more so trying to find stuff that I actually care to talk about. And a lot of that usually leans more toward the classic content. And quite frankly, you know, even though this is a very small channel, you just don't hear a lot of people talking about classic wrestling anymore. At least not casual YouTube channels like this one. You know, the ones that go through all the classic archives and break everything down show by show, try to be detail-oriented in explaining everything that was going on. There's just there's just not enough insight on what wrestling used to be versus what it is now. And it's so disappointing. Everyone's trying to latch themselves onto what the next hot federation is or who the next big thing is in wrestling. And it's just like, are there really any? If you sit down and think about it, sure, you got some diamonds in the rough. There are plenty of good to great professional wrestlers in the market today, but I don't know. The more I go back and watch these classic shows, it's just so disappointed to see what used to be versus what is now. And it's hard to wrap my head around the idea that pro wrestling could change that much in just a 30 to 40 to 50 year gap. If you really think about it, it's not that much time. It's a shame. Why don't we go ahead and get into things? We got a good amount of stuff to talk about today. And as always, we will begin with our Crockett TV review. On this 10/10 edition of Saturday on the Superstation. I think I literally just made a joke about that with the Retro Raw show, didn't I? Yeah, 10-10-10. I killed my own joke without even trying, didn't I? Anyway, so I ended up watching this show last weekend because I actually had a little bit of downtime on Saturday evening. It was right before the Fastlane special. I sat down and I said, you know what? I got time. I'm going to watch the Crockett show now. Figuring Sunday was already going to be kind of hectic, trying to record the audio for the Monday show. I've been a little more consistent with trying to make sure I leave enough room on the Monday show to actually edit everything and upload it to YouTube and Rumble in a reasonable amount of time. So a lot of the initial recording stages come on Sunday evenings for me, and then I'll kind of process everything the next day. Suffice it to say, it's been several days since I've seen the show. I'm literally glossing over my notes right now, trying to recall as much stuff as I can. I mean, since we were back to the normal 2-hour program, there was a lot more material to soak in. But we'll see how this one goes. Starrcade 87 is rapidly approaching. And as of the start of the show, we knew, well, basically two things. The theme and the city the show was being hosted from. Chi-Town Heat. Which meant they were in Chicago. I believe the UIC Pavilion, which has now been renamed to something completely different. Can't even remember what it is off the top of my head. Not that it matters. And simply put here, for our cold open, I'm just going to read you exactly what I wrote down. Keep in mind, it's been like 5 or 6 days since I've seen the show. I don't doubt for a minute this is something that actually happened. If it did, I don't remember ever seeing it. Midnight Express promo. Jim Cornette calls Ricky Morton a coward. Ricky Morton walks in and bitch slaps Cornette. Corny takes a comical bump. Midnight's look dumbfounded. That was it. The whole thing went maybe 45 seconds. Again, it is entirely possible that thing occurred. If it did, it totally escaped me. But you know what's funny? I can envision that being a thing. I can see Cornette taking the bump as we speak. Looking like a fish out of water. I also don't remember anything about the opening match with Lex Luger and Ricky Nelson. But based on my notes here, it doesn't look like I'm missing out on a whole lot. Ricky Nelson sports his knockoff Luger apparel for the occasion, without having the physique or presence of a Lex Luger. Luger toyed with him for a couple minutes and then beat him with the rack. If there was anything else of substance in that 2-minute period, I neglected to mention it. And I'm usually good at recalling the small things. So I guess it really was that uneventful. And then after that, they replayed the angle from the previous week with Terry Taylor and Nikita Koloff, where Eddie Gilbert jumped Nikita from behind, which allowed the heels to lay out Nikita with a double suplex and then steal his TV belt. And if you'll recall from the previous conversation regarding that angle we had, after we discussed the very disoriented Nikita Koloff throwing a tantrum about the fact that his belt was stolen in broad daylight, the other thing I talked about is how it triggered one of my biggest pet peeves in wrestling angles, the storyline of the heel challengers stealing championship belts from the babyface champions and management never doing anything about it. They never demand the heels return the stolen property back to its rightful owner. They just let it happen. Well, I'll be damned if Jim Crockett didn't squash that immediately. As he came out to the booth, he didn't demand that Taylor and Gilbert return the TV belt to Nikita. He strongly encouraged them to, I guess under penalty of heavy fines, without being so explicit about it. He specifically notified John Ayers, UWF commissioner, that he ought to take ownership and have his boys hand Nikita the belt back, stating that the NWA prizes itself on having fighting champions, and the UWF roster should adopt that philosophy. Subtle dig. But I was shocked. I was like, holy crap. They actually had management step up and demand the heels hand back the stolen possession. That is such a rarity anymore in wrestling. I almost forgot. There was a time where they actually addressed important matter like that. Almost like they were professionals. At which point, we come back from break for a J.J. Dillon promo. And actually, I remember this part of the show vividly, and that's not just because of the angle they showed. I have run into this issue with the Peacock Network before where I don't even know how the hell it happens, but something will get totally fucked up in the timeline to where the audio and the video get totally out of sync. It normally resolves itself after it reaches an infomercial plug. But I had a hell of a time trying to watch this thing because JJ is trying to recap the big angle from NWA Pro that took place last week. The match was advertised to be the Rock and Roll Express versus Tully and Arn for the World Tag Titles, a rematch. And if you recall, there was a cold open we talked about at the beginning where Ricky Morton punched Cornette in the face. Well, that actually played into what happened here on NWA Pro, because while the Rock and Roll are making their ways out to the ring, the Midnight Express jumped them in the aisleway with chairs and laid them out. Ricky in particular takes a divorce cord from Bobby Eaton, and he's down selling the arm and the shoulder. And of course, as they cut back to the studio, JJ's being the condescending heel, talking about how Tully and Arn were just innocent bystanders in the whole thing. They were contractually scheduled to wrestle a title match with Ricky and Robert, and if they were too hurt to compete, then Tully and Arn should have arguably won the match by forfeit. But no, that hot-headed, conceited Robert Gibson, with his overinflated ego, no, he hits the ring, and he tells the ref to ring the bell. Because, well, I guess Robert Gibson's a fucking idiot. That's the message I got from it. And this is where the video feed totally went to shit. It made it virtually impossible to watch this segment. And the last vision I remember seeing in this segment with Ricky Morton, who, by the way, just was back in the ring with his shoulder taped up. It was a complete jump cut. And we see him getting laid out by the heels while a bunch of the locker room babyfaces come out to run the heels off. I have no idea how Ricky got involved. I have no idea what led up to his run-in. I have no idea what Tully or Arn did to Ricky's arm. And for about the next 3 minutes, I was basically sitting on my couch fucking around with this stupid Peacock device, trying to sync up the audio and the video feed again. I tried closing and reopening the app. I tried skipping to the next commercial and then rewinding it to see if it would adjust itself on the fly. I couldn't figure it out. I basically had to fast forward to the next segment with Tony in the Starrcade Control Center just to get everything back on the same page again. So that was infuriating. I have no idea what the hell happened in that segment. And that sucks, because it was a crucial part of the ongoing story in the tag division. I believe that's how Tully and Arn won the straps, right? Because didn't we hear last week that there was a title change? And that they were going to show us the full footage this week? To update us on what happened? Well, apparently something happened. But because Peacock is a garbage streaming device, it completely ruined my ability to see it. So thanks a lot, cocksuckers. Your glitchy streaming service fucked everything up. I was so pissed. So anyway, like I said, I picked up on things again with Tony in the control center, and he's sitting there with Jim Crockett and J.J. Dillon. As Crockett very robotically explained here that Starrcade 87 will be hosted for a closed-circuited viewing in over 100 cities across the country. And if you listen real closely, you could hear the squeaking of Jim Crockett's neck as he creepily turned to stare at the camera and then back at Tony Schiavone. Now, a lot of the focus here early on was highlighting the footage of Ron Garvin beating Ric Flair in Detroit for the world title. As of this point, the rematch was not officially set in stone. What was set in stone, however, were two other matches, one of which came completely out of left field and had virtually nothing to do with anything that was currently happening on the Crockett programming. It is a UWF heavyweight title match, pinning champion Dr. Death Steve Williams versus challenger Barry Windham. I cannot remember the last time Steve Williams was on Crockett television, and I certainly don't remember him ever calling out or mentioning Barry Windham by name. But apparently that's going to be a thing. They also plugged Luger and Dusty for the United States heavyweight title. And JJ was sure to inform Crockett that if he wants that match to be official, management has to meet the Horsemen's list of demands. And, well, Jim Crockett all but said, we'll pray about that. That was coded language for, okay, we'll gloss over your contract demands and try to find every possible loophole to fuck you over and make sure that match does take place. I'm sure they'll think of something. And there's one thing JJ's the master of on this show, though. It is contract negotiation. So I'm hoping whatever those lists of demands are, Crockett looks them over thoroughly. So now that we've covered the bulk of the story angle material on the show, let's go back to the studio to see some local job guys eat shit. We had Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard with their newly won World Tag Team titles versus Alan Martin and Bob Riddle, with Arn reinforcing a classic Horseman line we've heard time and time again. I don't want to toot my own horn, but toot toot. And he's earned that tootin'. He's one half of the World Tag Team Champions, damn it. That is nothing to scoff at. We also had the Horseman marks at ringside this week, firmly in the camp of Tully and Arn, flashing up the signature 4 signs at the camera with their Walmart-bought cheap suits, looking like total nerds. Not as nerdy as Bob Riddle's hideous ring gear, though. I still can't get over those zebra-printed ring tights. He looked like a total asshat. I think that's why Tully and Arn specifically targeted him in this match, in order to get over their new move, as JJ was hyping up on commentary. And I'm sitting there excited. I'm like, oh, a new move. I wonder what it could be. It is a double gourd buster, which they used to win. I liked how Tony Schiavone had to play it cool. Like it was this huge revelation. This double gourd buster. He's like, wow, I've never seen anything like that before. That's very unique. I was like, what are you talking about, dude? It is Tully and Arn doing a simultaneous gourd buster. It is not that remarkable. Probably took them like 8 seconds to come up with that on the spot. I don't think they needed a blueprint to lay out how they were going to execute it. Speaking of unremarkable things, this Ron Garvin promo. You remember when we were talking about how great Ron Garvin's promos were in the last 2 months? Or he just did a complete 180 and his promos went from really bad to really fucking miraculous, just like that? Well, then this week happened, and we were right back to 1986 levels of Ron Garvin promo work. Not even to say it was bad, it was just uninspiring. He did a bunch of cut and paste, I'm proud to be a champion verbiage, talking about how he's proud to wear the gold and represent the good American people as the world heavyweight champion, ready to be a defending champion and take on all comers. Unless you're Ric Flair, apparently. And then it's on Ronnie's terms. That was basically everything there was to it. He totally spaced out midway through and tried to remember his train of thought. That was obvious. Aside from that, yeah, he told Ric Flair, I will give you a rematch when I feel like it. And I think those were his exact words. When I feel like it. What a fucking dick. And this guy's a babyface? Could have fooled me. From there, the Road Warriors rammed over Dave Isley and Larry Stevens in overly comical fashion. The highlight of which was in the first 3 seconds before the bell even rang. So often is the case on these studio shows where the Road Warriors would hit the ring and immediately shit can whoever job guy happened to be standing there. I don't think we've ever seen a case where the jobbers were actively trying to prepare for the evident ass beating. Like normally they just sort of get rammed over and they don't even try to put up a fight. Not Dave Isley and not Larry Stevens. And one of the most hysterical things I've ever seen from a set of job guys on this show, sometime before this taping, Isley and Stevens sat down to talk strategy. They said, all right, here's the plan. When Hawk and Animal slide into the ring, we'll try to prepare for them by raising our fists overhead, and we'll try to charge at them. We'll try to charge the Road Warriors, the Legion of Doom. Poor planning. These guys did not think this over well. So naturally, what should happen but Hawk and Animal slide into the ring. Isley and Stevens immediately both take off toward Hawk and Animal like two fucking buffoons. Hawk and Animal immediately tackle them to the ground, and they beat the piss out of them. I cannot tell you how many times I rewatched that opening sequence as I laughed uproariously at the visual of Dave Isley and Larry Stevens charging at Hawk and Animal with fists overhead, thinking they stood an iceberg's chance in hell of actually getting the advantage on these two monsters. This is what we live for in classic wrestling. Job guys being total fucking idiots and having no idea what they're doing. And then being made to look like clowns. The rest of it was just Hawk and Animal doing their usual thing. I believe Animal won with the lariat. That was followed with a ringside interview from both of them. Animal talked about the fact that the Road Warriors and Dusty got done doing their tour for the 6-man tag belts, which are apparently still a thing. They've held that prestigious trophy for a while, and we never see them defend it on television. They apparently do still have the trophy. It is sitting around on somebody's shelf collecting dust. They've also been the international tag champions over in Japan. But the one championship they have not sniffed yet, the World Tag Team titles. And they've got tunnel vision with one thing in mind, to become the World Tag Team Champions. And Hawk, well, I'll be frank, I have no idea what he said. Some reference to the Minnesota Twins, which I believe is a baseball team. Started talking about all the key players on the team and how even the coach recognized Hawk and Animal as the future World Tag Team Champions because they're winners. And then he repeated his "we snack on danger and dine on death" line. And here's everything I wrote down about Paul Ellering's promo. Something about the Road Warriors capitalizing on opportunities. Has Paul Ellering seriously always been this bad a promo? Or am I just now picking up on it? Seriously, the more I start to think about this, why did Hawk and Animal ever need a manager? Ellering was one of the most useless babyface managers in the history of wrestling. He literally served no purpose. If you think about it, Hawk and Animal could cut their own promos. Yeah, they were wacky, but they weren't terrible. They could talk. They could get their points across. Ellering never has anything productive to add. Most of the time, he just cuts nonsensical, rambling promos about nothing. Name me one good Precious Paul promo you've ever heard in your entire life. One memorable line, one memorable phrase. Has he ever had one? I can't think of anything. I've been reviewing these Crockett shows for 2 years. I mean, this was such a regression in promo delivery from start to finish. We get a good Animal promo to an okay, serviceable Hawk promo to Paul Ellering literally just saying a bunch of words. Oh, and by the way, going back to Hawk's line about how the Road Warriors were banking on the Minnesota Twins to win the World Series because they're winners. Kind of like how the coach was banking on the Road Warriors to win the World Tag Straps in Chicago. All I can say to that is, yeah. Just you wait. Conveniently on the same night, Starrcade 87 was hosted from Chicago, the hometown of the Road Warriors. It was indeed the night they killed Chicago. We'll circle back to that conversation. Then we had Eddie Gilbert versus The Menace, which was a very unmemorable TV segment, excluding one particular spot, which was just amazing. I don't even know how something like this could happen, but Gilbert stomping away on the Menace in the corner. And I remember seeing this the first time and thinking, did Menace trip him up? Was Gilbert going for something and then just lost his balance? I watched it like 2 or 3 times. I think Eddie just tripped over his own foot. He's kicking this guy in the corner, and all of a sudden, I just see Gilbert trip over his own foot and take an ass bump on the ground. And he just got right back up and kept doing moves. This had to have been the clumsiest thing I've ever seen from a wrestler in my entire life. And if you think about it, he took a bump off his own foot. How is that even possible? It was so bad, the announcers couldn't even draw attention to it at the expense of burying the poor guy. I mean, beyond that, the rest of the match was fine. Gilbert just beat him up for a few minutes and then won with his stun gun. I also enjoyed Terry Taylor on the floor looking over his shoulder the entire time in sheer panic, because he had both the TV titles over his shoulder, so he's probably subconsciously thinking, all right, Eddie, let's take this summabitch home before Nikita Koloff comes out and eats me for lunch. Spoiler, Nikita did not show up here. Because after that, we cut back to the booth for a Ric Flair promo. And I'll tell you this for sure, I think I'd have rather had Nikita Koloff breathing down my neck in that previous segment than Ric Flair, especially after this promo. This was one of those Nature Boy promos where you're just waiting for a stagehand to pass him a drink off camera at the very end just to get him to relax. As soon as the words "cock of the walk" passed Ric Flair's lips, that is when I knew we were in for an all-timer. He's talking about how Ron Garvin now knows what it's like to be living the 24/7 lifestyle of a world champion, as he proceeds to take off his dress shoes to flash them at the camera, stating that 2 weeks ago, Ron Garvin couldn't even afford a pair of shoes like that. He tells Garvin that he's great, that he proved himself in Detroit, but he'll never be a horseman. He'll never know what it's like to live the champion mindset night in and night out, year after year after year. He's not cut for it. Flair's paid his dues. As he rips off his dress shirt to reveal, I believe, a scar on his pec. I presume that was a direct shot at Garvin from the chop fest they had in their previous bouts. Although I'm not entirely sure because it's Ric fucking Flair. This was basically the point of the promo where Flair was just being himself. I honestly didn't even know what to write down because it was just basically incoherent ranting. I love the visual of him storming directly past the main camera. The camera guy has to spend like 10 minutes trying to readjust him into the frame with that big-ass TV equipment. As Flair just keeps cutting the promo like normal. His face is beet red as he's screaming that Ron Garvin's on Space Mountain right now with everybody looking at him, saying that he's going to turn Ron Garvin over and take him home. Not kidding. That is the thing he actually said. I'm going to turn you over and take you with me. This is where I jokingly wrote down, so Ron Garvin is now permitted to ride Space Mountain with Ric Flair too? Now we know he's completely lost his mind. I did not know Flair was into that sort of stuff. And finally, and I actually wrote this line down verbatim because it was just the best. Right as Flair walks off set, His final delivery to Ron Garvin. I'm going to get that belt back. I'll stop at nothing to... Shut up! Shut up over there! And then he looked back at the camera. He paused. I was waiting for him to finish his thought. And then he just left. That is some classic Nature Boy promo delivery. He has now reached the point where the mere mention of Ronnie Garvin's name is enough to drive him mad. He can't contain himself. This guy has totally lost it. And all Ronnie has to do is sit back and let Flair be a raging lunatic. It's the best Ric Flair story arc. If you really think about it, people often talk about what made Ric Flair so great on camera. What made him the crazy personality that he was? Well, you could trace it back here to 1987. It was Ron Garvin. He was the turning point. And we've seen some wild, crazy Ric Flair promos before, but boy, is he cranking it up to a whole different level. But this is like the best of the best when it comes to Ric Flair. The wild, bug-eyed, crazed heel. He always nails it. Even when you don't understand a goddamn thing he's talking about. All you do is watch him and you're like, look at this crazy old man. He's off his meds. Great stuff. Speaking of great stuff, Tully, Arn, and JJ are out at the booth. And what a fucking dynamite segment this was. No pun intended. Honestly, I shouldn't even joke. Trust me when I say, this was not a dynamite segment. AEW can never conceive of something this good in their sleep. No matter how much cocaine Tony Khan sniffs. So everyone's in the booth, and while Tully's doing some monologue about sports references, and a lot of that went over my head, Arn is in the backdrop, reading from what's obviously a Webster's dictionary, and he's specifically looking up the term adversity. And he reads the definition live, noting it is a state of serious difficulty or misfortune, something that the Rock and Roll Express know all too well about, now that they've lost their World Tag Team titles to the Horsemen. He says that Arn and Tully have built their careers on overcoming adversity, not sitting back crying over spilled milk. He says the Horsemen prioritize their careers above everything else, hard work and dedication. It's not about anything else, including the women. At which point, as Tully hears Arn drop the line about the Horsemen prioritizing work over women, he tries to interject by drawing Arn's attention to it. But of course, Arn's a pro, so he just keeps going. Meanwhile, JJ is in the back looking up the word disaster in the dictionary, reading off the definition, and this part is so fucking awesome. The definition is the Road Warriors losing their shot at the World Tag Titles. At which point all the heels let out a simultaneous ha 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 ha. The wicked, evil, maniacal laugh. God, I love that. I watched this portion of the interview over and over again, listening to the Horsemen be diabolical dirtbags. Never gets old. Laughing at the baby faces and mocking them with cheesy heel lines. And then to cap it off, Tully pulling a great ad-lib here. He was not going to let that line slide. He goes, Arn, just remember, we had that after party planned with all the girls. Don't talk about us not prioritizing women. To which Arn simply goes, I'm talking strictly business. Because again, Arn Anderson, he is the professional in the group. Tully, Flair, Luger, even JJ. They're all about fucking. But Arn, he's about training and hard work at the gym. He's trying to get his lifts in. And if the mood's right, then maybe he'll have some time for casual sex on the side. So you gotta have that balance point. You can't always be horny. It's a good life hack to live by. So then we had Ivan Koloff versus Mike Jackson, where my notes simply read, poor Mike Jackson. They've totally pulled the rug out from under this guy. You remember when they were giving this guy a push? That brief window for like 3 weeks where they were actually letting Mike Jackson rack up some TV wins? So much for that. He was right back to job status this week. Ivan absolutely maimed this guy. They gave Jackson like one spot at the end where he went up for a flying crossbody onto Ivan. But Ivan ducked it, killed him with a Russian sickle to the back of the head. At which point, just to add further insult to injury, Ivan proceeded to pound on Jackson's dead body while Paul Jones came in and started whipping him with a leather strap. I'm just sitting there watching this like, whose Cheerios did this guy piss in? Did he fart in Dusty's general direction off camera? Because they killed this guy. Just made him look like a total bum. Unfortunate. Also unfortunate was Paul Jones's promo afterwards, and that was mostly due to the fact that he was allowed to speak for more than 30 seconds. I have no idea what he said. Discount the one line where he indicated that he's never let anybody in his army down, which is obviously taking exception to, well, you know, just a handful of names. The Raging Bull, Rick Rude, Vladimir Petrov, Bear Von Raschke, Pistol Pez Wadley, and, well, pretty much every former associate of the Paul Jones Army he's managed to run off in the last year. But hey, at least Ivan's still loyal. That counts for something. So then we had one of the most bizarre things in the history of Crockett TV. For as long as I've been a wrestling fan, watching wrestling, listening to experts, reading various books over the years, I don't think I ever one time heard anybody ever bring up the name Canadian Kodiaks. Even Jim Cornette. I don't think I've ever heard Jim discuss these guys on his podcast. Which is weird because he was around during this period. You'd think maybe they would have got a glancing mention a time or two. But I don't think he has ever talked about these guys. And it'd be great to know if he even remembered who they were, how long they stuck around. To the best of my ability, I'm going to try to recount what happened here. I think their names were Bear and Hog. Don't ask me to identify which one was which. This is not Bear Bronson or Bear Boulder of AEW fame, but I mean, if you think about it, it was kind of in that same class. They were two generic, meaty powerhouse dudes that wrestled and worked exactly like the Road Warriors. minus the skill, the ring ability, the charisma, or the athleticism. In their 30-second squash with Rocky King and Ricky Jones, they proceeded to fuck up a catapult into a press slam spot on Rocky. At which point, during Skandar Akbar's promo afterwards, oh, and yes, by the way, that is important to mention, the General was on Crockett TV this week. We've never been able to avoid this guy, have we? He's been all over those Midsouth shows, all over those world-class shows from like 82, 83, and 84. Now here he is in 1987, trying to get over the Canadian Kodiaks, informing us that they're here, they're dangerous, and they will not be held accountable for the havoc they wreak on the NWA roster. Well, all right then. Funny how I've never heard them referenced or mentioned by anybody in the business after all these years. I mean, the one guy bared very close resemblance to Brock Lesnar. Facially, that is. But even just looking at them on camera, I mean, they didn't really look all that unique. The one guy had a giant brace on his right arm, but they were just two generic beefy-looking dudes with good bodies. The typical WWF bodybuilder look. I have no explanation. I don't know how long they stuck around. Maybe it'll be another nude breed situation where they're on camera for like 3 weeks and then we never see them again. I don't know. But it was a strange 3 minutes of television. I thought I was in a time warp. I'm like, do we all of a sudden jump to like 1990? During the height of the Jim Herd era where all the bad gimmicks were coming out of the fold? The Canadian Kodiaks. I got to try to see if these guys ever went anywhere. Then we had Kevin Sullivan versus George South, where I wrote down approximately one sentence. Sullivan kicked, chopped, and slapped South, and then one with a double foot stomp to the chest. Absolutely nothing else to say about it. Nor was there anything to say about his promo after the break. It was slightly more comprehensible than your average Kevin Sullivan promo. And by that, I still had no idea what the fuck he was talking about, but I at least knew who he was mad at. He mentioned Ric Flair. He threatened to beat up Jim Cornette's mother in the middle of the night. Not making that up. He said something about Luger demanding contract stipulations about this, that, and the other thing. To which his follow-up was, you know what I mean? And I directly said aloud, no, Kevin. I have no clue what the fuck you're talking about. And I never have. For as long as I have listened to Kevin Sullivan promos, I never knew what the guy was talking about. It's like a Bray Wyatt promo, minus me being captivated. Sullivan just lulled me into a sleep with his nonsensical droning. Anyway, he finally concluded with something about a chicken house and a cobra hanging out inside said chicken house. And my conclusion was, well, that was the thing that existed on the show. Then we cut to the ring for Ron Garvin versus Mike Force. I'm not sure what you would call this move, but I would say this is a newer addition to the Ron Garvin move arsenal. The spot where he traps the jobber in the corner, and I can't even really say he headbutts their chest, because it's not a headbutt. he just sort of digs his cranium into the guy's pec. I imagine it's not a pleasant feeling, but, I can't say I've seen that move utilized a whole lot over the years, especially by the amateurs. Speaking of the Ron Garvin special, we'll save that for the end, because Garvin needed to break out that move on special occasion, and boy, was this an apropos time. Apparently serving as punishment for Mike Force being an idiot and not selling his knockout punch. Let me back up. Okay, they're doing this match. Garvin, as usual, he's just having his way with the guy. It's very normal paint-by-numbers Ron Garvin match. And somewhere in the last minute, Garvin goes to give Force the knockout blow. And I don't know if Mike Force just didn't catch on to the fact that this was Ron Garvin's finish, or if he just decided to go into business for himself and no-sell the move entirely. But Mike Force tried to immediately stand back up after Garvin delivered his knockout punch. A move that left Ric Flair for dead. Mike Force, like a total fucking idiot, he just got up. This did not go over well with Ron Garvin. He looked at this man and said, "The fuck you're getting up for my knockout punch?" At which point, Garvin took this man to the ground, possibly as a shoot, and he proceeded to dig into this man's anatomy with a series of Garvin stomps, just one after the other, targeting his face, his neck, his arms, his legs, his groin. Any possible body limb Garvin could make contact with. If it was exposed, it was getting stomped. As David Crockett is on commentary, laughing tears of joy at the sight of this man being slaughtered. I believe his exact quote was, "Oh man, this is terrible, Tony." And finally, after Garvin put this man into the grave, Tony goes, "No one beats up people like Ron Garvin." To which David, in the giddiest manner possible, just goes, "I like that, Tony." Out of everything we've ever recapped on Crockett Television in the last 2 years, there are two universal things when it comes to this program. Two things that David Crockett will always mark out for, no question. Rock and Roll Express double dropkick, and Ron Garvin beating the shit out of people. Every time. Without fail. David Crockett is the biggest mark for that stuff. He could be having the worst day imaginable, but by God, if Ron Garvin goes in there and gets to beat up people, David Crockett, he is peachy, beyond elated. What an amazing man. So then we come back for the Sheep Herders versus Keith Steinborn and Ed Franks. Terribly boring squash. Someone before this match said, "Luke, Butch, we got 7 hours of TV time to fill. Just go out there and take your time." In reality, the match was probably, I don't know, something like 4 minutes. It felt like double that time. I don't even remember Ed Franks tagging in one time. I just remember Butch and Luke were beating up Steinborn at one point. I sort of blanked out for a little bit. Next thing I knew, they were pinning Steinborn with their double-team gutbuster. So either Franks tagged in for 2 seconds and then disappeared, or he took a powder somewhere during this match and never came back. Regardless, the other 6 hours of stuff happening in the middle there, I totally spaced out on. no offense to Butch and Luke, but we were about an hour into the show by this point, and I was already starting to get drained of energy. The last thing I wanted to see were the Bushwhackers going 60 minutes in a TV match. But they got to do a promo afterwards with Tony, and from what I was able to gather and all of their wackiness and oddball delivery, I believe they won the World Tag Team Championships. To which a thought occurred to me as they were talking. Man, could you imagine Tully and Arn versus the Sheep Herders in 1988? What a program that would have been. Talk about polar opposite personalities. Would have been a total styles clash, but maybe Tully and Arn could have pulled something off. I still have no idea how Johnny Ace fits in all this. He just seems totally out of place out there. Like, you could tell he's trying to get his foot in the door, but they have no idea what to do with him. So they're like, here, be the flag bearer for the Sheep Herders. That'll keep you preoccupied until Shane Douglas shows up, and then we can slap you guys together in a tag team. And then you still won't be over. Then the Warlord wrestled Mac McGiver. This was now the third Musclehead match in this one show. We've gone from the Road Warriors to the Canadian Kodiaks to the Warlord. And the crowd has gotten deader with each passing Monster Squash. This one was especially unmemorable, with the exception of Warlord plainly whiffing kicks to Mac's face, and then subsequently going over with a power slam. And the story rib continues, where the announcers spend more time glossing up the Mighty Wilbur's TV debut than talking about the mean powerhouse staring them right in front of their fucking faces. You have the Warlord out there, yet what is the bulk of the conversation? The Mighty Wilbur, the real difference maker in the Paul Jones army. What a joke. Anyway. Well, the TV main event was Terry Taylor versus Tommy Angel. Before that, though, we had Eddie Gilbert doing a promo with Tony Schiavone, sporting the TV titles, both of them, including Nikita's. And he says they're not entirely sure which belt they want to defend this week, so, well, since they have possession of both of them, why not? Let's defend them both. And Tony just goes, sounds reasonable to me. So we get another week of Taylor out there attempting to be a heel, but like 95% of the studio crowd is totally in his camp. That's funny. Even a week removed from them jumping Nikita and stealing his belt, the fans are still cheering the guy. Yeah, Taylor beat him up for a while, played with his food. He caught Angel with a running 5-arm lariat, and then a figure 4 for the 3 count. You know, now that I think of it, if he was going to call his running 4-arm the running 5-arm, should he have tried to claim the figure 4 as the figure 5? Wouldn't that have made more sense? Or am I just reading too much into it? Like, it just caught me as I'm thinking about it. He calls it the 5-arm, but he doesn't call the other move the figure 5. I mean, Charlotte tried to call her bridging figure 4 the figure 8. It's still a dumb name, but at least she put her own spin to it. Golden opportunity missed there by Terry Taylor. And so another week goes by where the heel champions are just walking around with stolen property. Nikita's MIA. Jim Crockett, literally after making that opening statement that Terry Taylor and Eddie Gilbert need to hand the NWA TV belt back to Nikita, now they're just out there still carrying both titles. Not giving a flying fuck about the ramifications, apparently. No one's doing anything to stop them. Where was Nikita, by the way? Did they ever explain that? Why was he just absent from the show? Seems weird to me. Like a week after his belt was stolen, he's not even on the show to respond. Not to even give chase to the guy to close out the program. Well, instead, we closed out with a Horseman promo where Ric Flair is sure to inform us that he's taken his meds. He's simmered down. He's had a drink or two. He's done having a mental breakdown. Now he is here to represent his boys professionally. And this is actually kind of cool with what they did here. While Flair is doing his promo, reciting his line about the henhouse conversation from last week, they're doing like almost a panorama effect with the camera to show all the horsemen at the podium in one shot. You know, making sure everybody's in the close-up in the frame. It was really kind of cool. And Flair says that he'll be damned if he's the only rooster in JJ's henhouse that's not bringing home the bacon at the end of the day. Which prompted Luger to interject and make some really bad analogy about their baggage being too heavy to transport because of all the gold they're carrying. Saying they might need to charge the bellhop double. And, well, then Arn said something at the end here, and I didn't really write much down. But they did do their signature horseman huddle, which is always great. But that was their big send-off. And admittedly, the show kind of started to drag a little bit in the last half hour, but the Starrcade hype is definitely there. One thing I've noticed, though, the Midnights, they've been miraculously missing from the show in the last few weeks. You know, aside from that NWA Pro angle we saw them air at the beginning, yeah, it's like the third week in a row with no Bobby, Stan, or Corny. Not even to do a promo segment. And they're like 4 weeks out from trying to ramp up excitement for that scaffold match. Which I know is a very infamous scaffold match by all record accounts. But still, you know, the hype for that doesn't seem anywhere as significant as it should right now. I hope we see them ramp up the enthusiasm for that. Elsewise, it was a good episode this week. The 2-hour shows are always hard shows to format because there's a lot of ebb and flow, a lot of ups and downs in that window. But they did a solid job keeping interest high this week. So, props to them. Well, we're back for more Midsouth. Likewise, we're back for more of Boyd Pierce's shit-stained suit. Or whatever we're calling that monstrosity covering his body. Looks like he literally just jumped into a wet puddle outside the Irish Neil Boys Club right before they started the taping. Then he walked back in and said, "I'm ready for work, Bill." And Bill looked at him and said, "You sure are, Boyd." Maybe that accounts for Bill's absence this week. He was so put off by Boyd's jacket the other week, he told Bob Roop to go out there and fill his place. That way Bill could go wash his eyes out with soap and water. Yes, I know what I just said. In any case, I guess we're ready to roll with things. Speaking of Bob Roop, he went over some logistics here on commentary, stating that he was back from an extended vacation, visiting his parents in Michigan, and that's why he'd been away for a while. To which my immediate thought was, didn't even notice. And then he also addressed the burning question that's been on everybody's mind. People were concerned that he hadn't been wrestling for a while, so they wanted to know when he was going to get back in the ring. To which I also said, no, they weren't. There is not a single wrestling fan alive that ever wondered to themselves, when is the next time Bob Roop is going to wrestle a match? Just wanted to throw that out there in case my sarcasm wasn't getting through well enough. Moving past that, we did get to see the fallout from last week's main event angle with Ted DiBiase and Mr. Wrestling 2. As you may recall, we went out last week on a cliffhanger with DiBiase and Wrestling 2 mid-brawl, and the show ended before we got any culmination. So here's how everything ended. In this unscheduled match that apparently became official somewhere off camera, because we indeed had a pinfall here, Hacksaw Duggan hit the ring while the match was still in progress, which I guess was not a DQ. But we'll just pretend like it was no DQ for the sake of argument. And it goes pretty much as you would expect. The 50-something-year-old Mr. Wrestling 2 is able to successfully fend off the two giant heels by himself with no problem. He hits them with about 9,000 knee lifts. Duggan threw some of the safest-looking kicks to the midsection you'll ever see. And then the heels powdered after Wrestling 2 caught DiBiase with a knee lift and pinned him. And I believe Bill's exact quote here was, "They've been whipped." And he said this about 50 more times in a row. For lack of better terms, you could say he was marking out for the babyface. And that's coming from the straight shooter, Bill Watts. The elation that overcame this man to see the babyface fend off two bad guys by himself, even with the fans chanting for dog. Wrestling 2 said, "Up yours, fuckers. I can handle this one by myself." And credit to him. He did. But that was all just part of the opening montage. Coming back, we get our first TV match of the week. It's the Mongolian Stomper versus Mike Bond. Well, I was going to say fallout from the TV debut the other week, but we actually had several debuts last week on Midsouth, Kamala being the other aforementioned name. Now, Stomper showed up during the Buck Robley Skandar Akbar Challenge match on behalf of Devastation Inc., so that was established from the gate that Stomper was brought in under Akbar's jurisdiction, so they gave him a brief showcase squash this week. He beat Mike Bond with a sleeper hold in a few minutes. It was actually very apropos. While Stomper put Bond away with a sleeper, Bob Roop was consciously putting me to sleep with his abysmal commentary. I will say, that is probably the one drawback about Boyd Pierce as a commentator. The fact that he never really contributed much as a play-by-play guy. So like if Watts wasn't there to fill in the dead space, you pretty much would have to rely on Boyd's dance partner to call the action. And unfortunately, in the case of Bob Roop, he was a fucking rotten commentator. The cure to insomnia that man was. So that part sucked. But on the subject of General Buck Robley, since we mentioned him a minute ago, our second match on the card was Robley versus Grappler number 2. Not to be directly confused with Grappler number 1. I guess the real question is, how did Reeser Bowden know? Was he already clued in? I'm presuming Grappler number 2 just told him. Not that it ever really mattered which grappler was which. And we've already seen them both in the ring together at the same time, so It's like there's an unsung mystery to uncover. Anyway, the match goes about 30 seconds before Wrestling 2 and Iron Mike Sharp come out to basically serve as ringside enforcers. Going by rote here, the story they've established on Midsouth TV is that if one grappler is lurking about, the other one is in close proximity. So they wanted to make sure there was no interference that came into play here. And Grappler 1 did make an appearance, but he kept his distance from the ring. I guess he didn't want to run into the iron wall that was Mike Sharp. Maybe Sharp had an invisible force field up that kept Grappler away from the ring. Or maybe he was just a pussy, who knows. The match was boring, but Robley won with a sleeper hold. That is 2 consecutive matches with a sleeper submission victory. If Dave Meltzer were recapping it, he'd have taken a half star off the rating for back-to-back duplicate finishes. Me, on the other hand, I didn't really think much of it, but I could see how the experts might take issue with it. The joke I kept running through my head here was, if this were WWE, they'd have had a third grappler show up while Sharp and Wrestling 2 were distracted with grappler number 1. That way grappler 2 could still find a way to steal the pin. But then I remembered, since we're talking about Mid-South, and things actually made sense during this time, no, the story was, oh look, the outside babyfaces made sure the heel didn't interfere, and the babyface won clean as a result. It's like this shit used to be so simple back in the day. And then following that, we had a tag match with Dick Murdoch and Mike Sharp versus Hacksaw Duggan and Ted DiBiase. Murdoch coming out shirtless, while also sporting the carry-on knapsack. That was oddly humorous. I was like, is he going camping without a shirt on? That's some super old school shit right there. A man's man. This is a good tag match. I will say, one thing I never see guys do anymore, and it's a damn shame this move sort of fell off the map in the last 15 to 20 years, because you used to see it so often back in the day. The running head scissors takeover, where you run up and you trap the legs over the guy's neck while he's standing straight up, and then you pull him back down to the mat using your thigh strength. You never see guys do that anymore. Even the smaller athletic guys. Fucking Dick Murdoch pulled that move off here. And Murdoch was neither small nor athletic. But they had a real simple formula. Faces had their wild flurry of offense early on. The heels were able to cut off Sharp and isolate the arm. They worked that over for a while. Murdoch was able to eventually tag in and get the momentum going back for the faces. At which point, Sharp tagged back in a minute or so later, started immediately no-selling the arm injury by firing away with rapid-fire punches on Duggan and DiBiase. That was mildly amusing. I liked Bob Roope's commentary on that spot by noting that Sharp was aroused. Yes, of all ways to describe House of Fire Mike Sharp, he picked the word aroused. The only highlight of Roope's commentary in that entire 40-minute period. The finish was Duggan catching Sharp with a tackle behind the ref's back. And while he and Murdoch were brawling on the floor, that left enough time for DiBiase to load the glove with his imaginary gimmick and hit Sharp in the face to knock him out. It was all action. Chaotic sequence at the end included. It is always cool seeing the way Mid-South used to film all the chaos from the wide shots so you could see everything happening in the frame at the same time. It's so different from how things are done today, where they have to have like 80 goddamn camera cuts during the bulk of the action. But like I said, really fun tag match. basic stuff. Didn't overstay its welcome. Accomplished what it needed to. Babyfaces got fucked. But on the other hand, DiBiase and Duggan continue to rack up wins, and that's important for story purposes, considering where they're going in just a few months with the whole Rat Pack development. So there is a clear-cut vision with what they're doing. And then we came back for another Kamala squash. He beat Vinny Romeo. And it was a literal definition of a squash. Blink and you miss it. Bell rings. Kamala ragdolls Vinny around. Pats his belly. He chops Vinny and rakes the back. Pats the belly a few more times. Gave him a standing bear hug. Beat him with a running splash. And then he pat his belly again. I'm a fan of the War Dance belly pat spot, a signature of the Kamala gimmick, who, by the way, is now strictly going by Kamala, Kamala, not Kimala. Yeah, they already killed that after a week. It wasn't getting over, brother. But that was that. Then we came back for more tag action. Kelly Kiniski and Bob Stabler's Hideous Jewish Afro versus Junkyard Dog and Mr. Olympia. And, well, here's an easy simplification of everything that happened. I'm wondering if I missed out on any detail looking back. JYD and Olympia do about 70 offensive moves to Kiniski and Stabler. Olympia has some of the best arm drags in the history of this sport. JYD won with a thumper. Oh, and I think Kiniski gave himself a concussion, taking a bump out to the concrete, courtesy of Olympia's dropkick. That looked gnarly. You know, much like the Duggan DiBiase match, though, they were sort of establishing Dog and Olympia as the top babyface team. Of course, you have to keep watching because they got some major story plans for Mr. Olympia in the months to come. Right now, he and Dog are a very cohesive unit. But, well, I'll just leave it there. Don't want to get too deep into the weeds just yet. And for our final match, Tim Horner versus Jesse Barr, which was basically just a standby match while they still had some airtime left. Boyd spent most of the time plugging next week's card, so it was just kind of an infomercial segment. Not a bad match. Some fun amateur takedowns and mat work early on. Really just wasn't anything interesting to report on it. No finish either. The bell sounded before we got a pinfall. Shocker too. I know. Tim Horner wrestled, and there wasn't anything interesting to talk about. That'll be a recurring theme with a lot of Horner's matches on this show. And for pretty much any company he worked for. He's still on the up and up, though. Give him time to mature. Pretty simple show overall this week. They didn't really advance a whole lot in the story department, but they established who the top players are. Right now the big money match is JYD and Olympia versus DiBiase and Duggan. So they're slow burning the progression to that blow off. We've also got the Monster Heels wreaking havoc on the show, so we'll see how more of that unfolds. We still have not established Kamala as part of Akbar's crew. Right now he's just coming out with Friday. But I'm sure we'll hear more about that in weeks to come. As I always talk about with these shows, they fly by. Very easy, very digestible wrestling programs. There's never any downtime. They keep things moving. But you're always kept in the loop about the key important detail. They never leave anybody in the dark. And as somebody that's watched plenty of bad modern wrestling in the last 15-something years, where it's a constant stream of questioning everything and hardly ever knowing what the fuck's going on. I look back at shows like this and long for the days when wrestling could be so simple and so logical and so easy to follow. What happened? Well, again, I already talked about it before. We let the inmates run the asylum. What's that old Dutch man tell saying? That he liked it better when the marks were in the crowd and not in the ring? Yeah. I think I see what he's talking about now. Why, Chris, why? You had so much to live for. Well, we've definitely reached a turning point with World Class in October of '84. Now that we've established Chris Adams as a turncoat, a traitor, a backstabber, a no-good son of a bitch. Well, we've been redeemed. Because all of a sudden, World Class is a hot program to talk about again. And in fact, that's pretty much what the majority of the show was built around this week. Which you kind of had to figure. And that was a pretty big news bulletin that broke out the other week. Anything else on the show is going to be subordinate by comparison. And, well, I've got to admit, having very minimal world-class footage ingrained in my head to begin with, I was interested to see how they were going to follow up with addressing that storyline. I think they covered their tracks pretty well, all things considered. And this was layered over a series of various pre-tapes, so we'll try to break down each one individually and talk about the main points. And to start, we have to go back to last week and break down the finish of that main event. To refresh your memory, the match was Jake Roberts and Gino Hernandez versus Kevin Von Erich and Chris Adams. And right at the finish of the match, Stella Mae French had gotten involved to try to trip up Gino on the floor. But in one of those rare circumstances where Gino defied gravity, he was able to turn that over into a pinfall and cradle Adams to quote-unquote steal the pin. And of course, Adams was livid about this. He actually went so far as to shove and get physical with Stella after the bell. He was so pissed off. And of course, with Kevin catching this, he wasn't going to stand around and let Chris bully Stella like that, be it face or heel. And as we remember, Gary Hart was also in the ring putting his hands on Stella. And Kevin was already suspicious of his intentions from the onset. So Kevin did not hesitate to throw the first punch to Hart after warning him multiple times to keep his hands off of Stella. And that was the point where Adams gave Kevin the super kick and left him laying. And of course, we remember the aftermath, where Jake and Gino put the boots to Kevin while Chris Adams walked off and basically left him to fend for himself. And by the way, Bill Mercer and Kevin were recapping this whole thing in their sit-down. I'm just reiterating their commentary. I just love during this initial conversation. Of course, if you ever listen to Kerry or Kevin do promos, you would probably say they were not the bubbliest of personalities. So, hearing Kevin in his very dry delivery say, "Man, I'll tell you, Bill, when Chris Adams put his hands on Stella and super kicked me last week, I was really mad." That had me chuckling. Kevin was so furious. Meanwhile, his delivery could not be any more dull. I was really mad. It's like almost with that exact tonal inflection. But that was part one of the clip portion. Then we got some follow-up footage taken from Fort Worth, where we found out that Chris Adams had actually linked up with Jake and Gino in another scheduled six-man tag against Kerry, Mike, and Buck Zumhoff. Initially scheduled to be against all the Von Erichs, But due to Kevin not getting cleared for concussion issues, kayfabe, Kevin was taken out of the match and replaced with Buck. Of course, that didn't matter anyway, because fast forward 10 minutes into the tape, Kevin's running out and jumping Chris for the DQ anyway. And they do the big dramatic pull apart with everybody as we transition back to the tape with Mercer and Kevin. And the important part of this portion of the tape was Kevin trying to rationalize how we even got to this point. After all the loyalty and the proven allegiance that Chris had with the Von Erichs for all those years, what led to this moment where he would just willingly throw it all away? Was it ego? Was it Gary Hart manipulating him behind the scenes? No, Kevin's not sure himself. But right now, the bigger issue at play is that Chris is trying to make it personal by targeting Kevin, his brothers, and his titles. So whatever the reason is for Chris behaving this way, whatever excuse he wants to make for the turn, none of that matters right now. If he wants to pick a fight with Kevin and his brothers, they can settle the issue in the ring like men. So that was all well handled. Part 1 of the interview. And then we come back for an on-location interview with Mercer and Jake Roberts. The location being, well, according to Bill Mercer himself, Jake's environment, quote unquote. It was basically a rundown portion of his property where there's garbage laying everywhere, broken tires, car parts, firewood. You know, things you would innately find in nature. And, well, this certainly was a Jake Roberts promo. If I sat here and tried to replicate every single word he spoke, I still don't think I would be able to make sense out of it by the end. I mean, I wrote down a lot of stuff he said as I'm looking over my bullet points. I still don't really know what the hell he was talking about. The gist of it was, he and Gino are very different when it comes to wrestling philosophies and personal lifestyles, but they can still work cohesively as a team. And as far as Jake goes, he lives in his own world. Everything surrounding him was put on this earth before he was born. I guess alluding to the giant pile of rubble in the background, which, though we don't know for sure, and maybe that was around before Jake was born. Highly doubt it. He mentioned something about the fact that the laws were put into place before he was born as well, but Jake is not the kind of guy that cares about rules or laws because, well, rules are meant to be broken. Somewhere during this promo, he stopped mid-thought to ask Mercer if he liked his outfit. And this is important to note. He was wearing an oversized charcoal blazer, no shirt, but he had the necktie. And I think he tried to rub some grease on the lapel to give it more of a disheveled look. And of course, my thought at the end of all this, very similar to most Jake promos I've heard throughout my life. Man, I have no idea what the fuck that guy just said, but holy shit was it captivating. It's almost to the same level as how I always felt about Undertaker promos. Just remove some of the goofiness behind the gimmick. Not for 1 second did I ever think during this Jake promo, I don't believe anything that guy says. Word for word, I knew this fucker meant every word he said. Even if it didn't make a lick of sense, by and large. Jake Roberts was Jake Roberts. What you saw was what you got. And all these years later, boy, does that statement still hold true. Of course, the whole time, too, I can only think, I wonder what's going through Bill Mercer's head right now. Hanging out in this sketchy area, rundown neighborhood with like no sign of life for miles. You know, even with this being a work, I can only imagine if Bill thought to himself, man, this might be the last day on earth. He probably went into this thinking, I might not make it out of this one alive. If there is ever a moment for everything to come to a screeching halt, this would be it. What an amazing segment. As was the previous one with Kevin, but this one was truly unique for a completely different reason. I almost forgot there was actual wrestling to talk about this week. Not that any of it mattered, worth the shit, let's be honest. I mean, the best one was the Jake Roberts squash. It happened after the break, and that only went like 2 minutes. He wrestled Tony Torres in a match that I think was better than every single Ron Garvin Superstation squash we've ever reviewed. All I remember about it is that the bell rang. Roberts immediately started pounding the piss out of this guy, just having his way with this poor jabroni for like several minutes. And then right at the end, he kills Torres with a DDT, at which point he immediately starts taunting him by screaming, "Get up!" I regret to inform you, Tony Torres did not get up. But it was a phenomenal squash. And then we came back for a locker room interview ahead of the big tag team main event. And as soon as I mention these names, you will see why the show peaked with those pre-taped interviews. Brace yourselves for impact. In this interview, we had the Iceman King Parsons and Rock and Roll Buck Zumhoff hyping up a tag team match with the Irwin brothers. They also expressed their shock over the Chris Adams heel turn. Didn't really write a whole lot down about what Buck said, but the Iceman talked about his history with Chris. And I did like his way of explaining Adams' heel turn was by saying he went goofy. It's a hell of a way to clarify it. And like I said, once Buck came in with the boombox, I just kind of checked out. And yes, for the record, he was actually playing music through the speakers as he walked in, which made it almost impossible to understand the promo. I cannot confirm whether or not this was dubbed over music, but either way, it was not a very riveting promo. You know what else wasn't riveting? Mike Von Erich having a very, very bad match with Art Cruz. I'm literally convinced at this point that if you look up the metaphor, monkey trying to fuck a football, you will get a literal definition of Mike Von Erich. That is what this guy looked like in the ring every single time he wrestled. This dude, oh my God. He's got to be the worst wrestler in 1984, right? Who else even came close? I mean, the missing link and Killer Khan were rotten professional wrestlers, but they at least knew how to do a basic arm drag takeover. In fact, I think Bill Mercer summed this up perfectly. The moment Mike grabbed Cruz and pulled him down with an armbar, Bill says, and I quote, "Look at Mike kind of work over Art Cruz there." He actually said that. Mike Von Erich kind of worked over Art Cruz. Fitting. That had to be a first. Look, he's almost working his opponent over. Maybe one day, if he ever graduates past week 1 training horrible. Fuck, dude. I can't believe how much time this match got. 7 minutes from bell to bell. Die to death. I mean, Art Cruz was an adequate wrestler by his own right, so whenever he was on offense, the action was passable. I don't even know what you would call Mike's fiery comeback here. Like, anytime he would try to throw punches or kick at Cruz, he would do these wacky stomps while standing in place. Looked like Curly from the Three Stooges having a conniption. And my God, this fucking finish. God, this finish. I don't even know what happened here. Clearly Mike was the culprit, though. Because after this obvious botch, this dude totally froze in place. He goes to whip Cruz off the ropes. And they're supposed to do the leapfrog duck spot where Mike goes over, Cruz ducks underneath, hits the ropes, comes back from the other direction, and blah, blah. You fill in the blank with whatever they were going to do. Clearly that was the plan. It did not work. As Mike goes to leapfrog Cruz, he gets maybe an inch off the ground. And that's being generous. I think I've seen handicapped men at the retirement home get more height doing a leapfrog than Mike did in this spot. So yeah, he fucks that up royally. To the point where he stops and looks at Cruz as if to say, well, shit, now what? And Cruz kind of bumbles into the ropes and tries to sell it anyway because he doesn't know what the hell to do. And so finally, as a means of course correcting, they do the spot again, which is like Pro Wrestling 101 rule breaking. Don't ever repeat a botched spot immediately afterwards. Do something else. But no, they do it again. And this time, Mike sort of caught Cruz with a sloppy knee to the face and or chest. I don't know what he was aiming for, but we'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say he connected with a body part. And then he pinned him. Fucking revolting is what I wrote. These Mike Von Erich singles matches, bro. They are... I mean, they're laughably bad. And you know, to be fair, I can't blame him outright because he's obviously trying. He's not phoning it in. But you know, people so often talk about the stark contrast with all the Von Erich brothers. It's like David, Kevin, and Kerry were on a whole different plane. And then you got Mike. It's like you got the three core brothers, and then you get Mike way off in a distant fourth place. Funny, I made the Curly joke with him earlier. I don't even know if we could call Mike the Curly of the Von Erich brothers. He barely passed for Shemp. Because at least Shemp was a good addition to the Stooges after Curly left. We'd have to give him the Joe credential. Hideously rotten. And that left us with the main event. Speaking of rotten, teased earlier in the interview pre-tape, it is the Iceman and Buck Zumhoff versus the Irwin brothers. Fucking Scott Irwin, dude. He was so unearthly hilarious to watch here. Every single bump, every single motion he made in this match, it was like straight out of a Scooby-Doo cartoon where the monster is chasing Shaggy and Scooby around and the animation of the zombie or whatever is ridiculously over the top. That is what Scott Irwin looked like in human form during 99% of this match. There were like 3 or 4 sequences here where Scott was supposed to do some kind of running charge at one of the baby faces. Every single time, without fail, and I even rewound it to watch it again, I was laughing so hard, he would, and I don't even know if he was subconsciously doing this or if he did it on purpose, he puffed out his chest and he ran full speed, arms at his side. And it was particularly great later on in the match because there were two bumps that he took. The first of which was him barreling out of the ring and then landing tailbone first on the timekeeper's table. The second one being the spot where he ran with his puffed out chest toward the ropes. And after the Iceman ducked, Scott somehow guillotined himself on the top rope and then just took a flat back bump. I don't even know how. I just couldn't get over how bad Scott was in this match. God, and that's even competing with Buck Zumhoff, who was equally as terrible. I mean, everything else for the most part was just your standard run-of-the-mill Dallas TV main event. You basically had 4 underneath mid-card guys. You're only going to get so much out of it. Yeah, things broke down at the end where, after a miscue spot with the heels, probably less than a minute later, they just turn around and hit a double clothesline on Zumhoff for the pin. I honestly don't even know how they went from the miscue spot to getting the pin in a matter of literal seconds. But, yeah. I mean, I said it was rotten. I was mostly speaking on behalf of Scott Hogg Irwin's comically bad overselling. Zumhoff still sucks, but I can't really say he did anything to fuck up the match. It was just a match. Not a good match, but it existed. You know, again, I already talked about it at the beginning. After the Chris Adams story follow-up, the rest of the show is basically just a filler hour. You know, they've set in motion in the new story direction for the Von Erich family, which is good. They got 2 new additions to the heel roster in the upper mid-card / main event role. I'm obviously talking about Jake Roberts and Chris Adams. So they are making a lot of progress in that domain. You know, elsewise, the other stuff on the show is just neutral card filler. And there's nothing wrong with that. We'll just try not to harp on the Mike Von Erich match because that'll get my blood boiling again if I give it too much forethought. Anyway, as we round out things for this one, make sure y'all come back to check out the Monday show. We'll be back to the regular format with Retro Raw, Retro NXT, and SmackDown. Got to get back in the loop of that again. Let's see the fallout from Fastlane and what they're gearing up for next. I guess it would be the Survivor Series show, wouldn't it? When is that show taking place? That is on November 25th. Okay. Well, they're well over a month out from that. Is there another show that fills in the meantime? Let's see. No. I don't see anything. Huh. That's quite a while. I don't really know what to say about that. We'll figure it out. Oops, I just clicked on something. Anyway, thanks for checking out the show, everybody. Catch you on the flip side. Again, make sure to subscribe, comment, like the show. And we'll see you soon. Take care. Peace out.